In this Python lesson, we're going to look at input and output designs. So we're going to build on the work you've done in the last two lessons. So if you haven't already done that work, you need to go back to lesson 1 and lesson 2 to look at text input. So we're going to, first of all, look at what we did last lesson. If you can add this to your e-portfolio, put these questions in and then answer them. So what is an algorithm? You should know what that is. We recapped that last week, and that's those set words that you need to remember. That's also in your knowledge organizer. How can you identify a command? From the last unit we did on HTML, we looked at what is a rollover image. So you can look at that in your web authoring. And what does HTML stand for? So you need to answer those 4 questions, add those to your e-portfolio before moving on. Again, you can pause the video and resume the video once you've answered those questions. So today we're going to try and understand or develop our understanding of Python syntax. We're going to create a program, run that program, and we're going to then put that information into our e-portfolio so we've got it there to look back on in the future. We've previously looked at data types. This is a bit of recap here. We've got integers, which are whole numbers. We've got floats or real numbers, which are decimal numbers. We've got strings and characters, which are in effect words. So they get spotted by the double speech mark, the speech marks here. Boolean is a true or false answer, and a list is where we have information in a list. So a list gets shown by the square brackets on the end. So there are different data types that we need to be aware of in Python. Now we're going to today look at variables, and variables is something that we can store. So we can store things, and a variable is like a box. We're going to put it in the box, and what we can do is go into that box and take it out when we need it, or we can swap that item in that box, or we could add to it. So you've got to think about a variable as a box, a place that it can be stored. So it's a memory location where that information can be stored. So again, just some general housekeeping information. You need to try and save your work as you go along. As you are progressing through your work, take screen snips of that work or screen prints and put that into your e-portfolio. If you do get any errors, it's not a problem. Just put a screen print of that into your work and try and work out why you've got an error, and then explain why you've got an error afterwards. And remember to share your e-portfolio with your teacher. So we've got our knowledge recap here. An algorithm is a step-by-step series of instructions on how to solve a problem or how to complete a complex task. And this is what we're recapping from last week. Our algorithm is like a recipe, a step-by-step series of instructions, a kind of method of how to do something. The new words we're going to look at today is concatenation. So string concatenation means joining 2 items together or gluing 2 items together. And I've got an example here to go through and show you. You could have the first string of key and another string of board. And we can concatenate those strings by using the plus symbol. So we've got key plus board. What will then happen if we printed key plus board, we'll end up with keyboard. Also from last week we had the comma. So key, comma, board. We'll still say keyboard, but you'll have a space in between your words. So sometimes you want to join the words together like this. Sometimes you just want them together, but like a sentence rather than all in one word. So you've got 2 different ways to join or glue words together. So we're going to look at variables today. Variables is a way of storing information in the computer, and we can store our code in a variable. So what we're looking to do is make the variables, but we have to give our variables sensible names so we know what we're referring to. With a variable, we can then collect information from a user, we can store that information in the variable, and then we can process that data. And then finally we can output that data to the computer screen so we can see it. And this will become clear when we start working with variables in a moment. When we get to variables, we have to name them carefully. So I've called a variable here spaced out. This variable will not work because there's a space in it. So if there's a space in our variable name, it will not work. So we've got to remember that variables cannot have spaces. Similarly, we cannot have hyphens or a plus sign or a asterisk or a forward slash, because the computer in Python sees this as a minus, a plus, a multiply or a divide. So variable names cannot have hyphens. And again, variables cannot start with a number, because Python sees this as a mathematical equation, and therefore it cannot be a number. So just remember, your variable names must not begin with a number. So if you have something where you need 2 words, you can use an underscore here. So my variable 2 would actually work. I know it's got a number, and I know we've got a gap, but because we've used an underscore and the variable name doesn't start with a number, we're okay. So this is an okay variable. So you do need a note in your ePortfolio about variable names, what is allowed and what is not allowed. Now, we've mentioned here about capital letters. So capital letters, if I was going to write a variable name, I tend not to use all capital letters, because that tends to imply it's a constant, which is something that doesn't change, whereas a variable is something that can change. So I tend to write my variables in lowercase letters rather than capitals. So we're going to do a little bit of work in Python today, and like last week, I'm going to show some of my Python work using repel as I work through here. If you've got Python installed at home, you can do it direct in Python, or Python on a computer in school, you can do it direct in Python. But if you haven't got Python, then we can use repel. So I'm just going to remind you about this. When we go on to repel, we can just click the Python version and we can create one. Make sure we've got Python. There we go. And I now have my repel loading. So here I write my information, and when I run my program at the top here, it will appear on this right hand side. So we're just creating a variable called my variable, and again remember, I've got no space in here. I've joined my words together. This time I've started my second word with a capital so I can see the information. This is known as camel case, so it's like the humps of a camel. So this is absolutely fine for writing variables. So equals, and I'm just putting test1, and then I'm going to create a second variable, and this one is going to be my variable equals test2. So I've got 2 variables. So the next bit I'm going to do is I'm going to try and send a message like we did last week to print my code. So I've just got print my variable, and I'm going to also have another print code, print, this time I've got my second variable, and now I've got a print my variable, and lastly print my variable. So what you need to do before running this program, before clicking run, you need to be able to predict what's going to happen here. So when you click run, something's going to appear in here, and we can follow this through. We've assigned our variable here, test1, and the second variable, my variable test2. So when I print my variable, it's going to look for this variable and it's going to say test1. Likewise, when I print my variable with the capital M and the capital V, it's going to find that variable and print test2. So you need to print what's going to happen, or explain what's going to happen when you print this for third variable, and lastly see what's different on this one, what's going to happen. So you can pause the video and make your predictions. Now that you've made your predictions, you can run your code. And what we can see here is it's printed test1, which is the first variable, test2, which is the second variable, and then we get an error. And as I said before, there's nothing wrong with getting errors, we just have to understand why we're getting errors. So it's looking at line 5. There's an error on line 5, print, and it says my variable is not defined. So it cannot find this my variable. That's because there isn't a my variable with a lowercase m and a lowercase v. So it can't find it in our variable names here, and therefore we've got an error. So hopefully we understand why we have that error. And again, I can take this line out because that has an error. I'm just going to delete that one. And I'm going to rerun my code. So now I run it. I still have the first two. This time my error message here on line 5 is a different error message. And it's saying print is not defined. And that's because my instruction of print, I've actually not spelt it correctly, but I've used a capital P and it doesn't like that. So that's why we have an error there. So I can change that P to the lowercase p. It's now gone the correct color. When I run it, I end up allowing my code to run and print that test2. So hopefully you understand there about the printing of the variables. What it's doing, it's printing whatever we've got stored at that variable name. So then the next one printing whatever we got stored at that variable name. And as I said, we can change a variable name in the program, and therefore our print will be different every time. Let's move on. So this is a little bit of recap from last week. You might be able to predict what happens here. I'm not going to do this one for you, but I'm just showing that we can delete the code in REPL, test1 equals, and what you'll notice here is I've used one of these rather than the speech marks. So it makes no difference, Python will understand both, but I prefer using the speech marks. So I'm just going to do the first one, hello \world. So I've used speech marks rather than these apostrophes. So when I run this, it hasn't actually done anything because I've not told it to print test1. So let's just go through print test1. So now when I run it, there we go, hello world appears. So hopefully you're understanding what the variable's doing. It's storing the information and understanding the print command in there as well. So you can do the other ones and see what happens. You can predict what \n will do, and you can predict what will happen on this third one. See if you can guess what happens before you run it. Okay, task 11. So we've got some commands here, and this is where Python gets a little bit more interesting. And we're going to assign, I'm just going to change my code already. I've got a name. A name is just going to be a blank string. There's going to be nothing in there. So I'm declaring a variable by doing this. I'm saying there's going to be something in name, but I don't know what that is yet. So my next line is going to be a name equals input. And this is a new command we've got here, input. We've not used this before. So input is putting information into the computer. So I've got what is your name? ? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to print, I'm going to say hello, and then I'm going to concatenate the data after the speech marks and put in name. So now when I run this, it's come up with an instruction, what is your name? So I'm just going to put in here Mr. Lucas, and then when I press return it says hello Mr. Lucas. If I run this again, what is your name? And I'm going to put in Fred Blogs. When I press enter it will say hello Fred Blogs. So it's using the information from the input and storing that in the variable name and then displaying that when I print the variable name. So this is how computer bots work when you're talking to them on a computer. Artificial intelligence, it learns variable names, it holds that information and uses that when it needs it. So again, you need to show evidence of your work and put it into your e-portfolio. So the next stage is to carry on from the previous task, amend your program so we can add in an age variable, and you'll see it's not in here, but all I have to do for that one is I've got my name, I can add in an age variable, so I've built that in, and I can have a question in here of age equals input, how old are you? And then again I can print hello name, and then what I'm going to do, comma, you look very good for, and then I'm just going to put in age. Get my... So we've got age input, print hello, whatever we've entered for name, you look very good for age, and I'm just going to add in there years old. So again, I'm going to run this. I'm just going to put Mr. Lucas, how old are you? I feel 102 at the moment, so I'll put 102. And hello, Mr. Lucas, you look very good for 102 years old. So that is how Python is using variables in our code. Then you can add a gender in there as well. So your task will be to add gender in as an input. And I've got an example here. Mr. Dowse actually wrote, so what is your name, Mr. Dowse? What is age? 102. What is your gender? You decided to be a dragon. And hello, Mr. Dowse, you look pretty good for a 102-year-old dragon. So you can see how that information is created. You can add that to your Python code. So today we've learnt two things. We've learnt to use variables, and we've learnt to concatenate our data so we can add bits together when we're displaying it. So you should have that information in your ePortfolio. To finish, all you need to do is try and answer these 9 different questions in your ePortfolio and then submit your work to your teacher. If you have any issues, just ask them, and I'm sure those teachers will help you, support you through your Python code.